Good morning, and thank you once again, Congressman Pinninger, for inviting me back to share my most recent research. My remarks today are my own. They are not representative of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, or the Perry Center. And what I'm going to do is explain a crisis that we're undergoing now, share a short PowerPoint with you all. You can follow me on Twitter, and we can stay in touch. What we're seeing right now in the United States, and unfortunately it's coming to your countries as well, is the epidemic of synthetic drugs. Our colleagues in Canada are experiencing something very similar. But more importantly, what I want to highlight on this illicit finance panel is that there are no financial crimes that don't directly basically attack the health and welfare of our populations. And more importantly, this epidemic and the poisoning of our youth through synthetic drugs is literally coming to your countries. It's just a matter of time. Next slide, please. So what we're seeing now is what we call the globalization of the illicit economy. As we had heard from Jerome, the size of these different countries, you actually have an illicit economy that eclipses the GDP of many countries in the world. And this has been taking place since the advent of globalization and the fall of the Berlin Wall. As we have been citizens who have benefited from globalization, getting access to goods, services, information, the ability of all of us to travel and exchange views here in Washington, we've seen the dark side of globalization, where illicit actors, criminals, terrorists, insurgents, traffickers, and those who finance them have taken advantage and created this illicit economy. Through our research at National Defense University, we're studying how COVID-19, the pandemic, and sadly the economic crisis and recession that we're about to embark on has actually expanded illicit goods, contraband, and sadly too the mental health issues that have created increasing dependence on vices, not just drugs, but even alcohol and other types of activities that are quite harmful to every generation in our countries. Next slide, please. What we've seen, though, most importantly, I spend most of my time in Latin America, is what we call the globalization of narcotics trafficking, right? So we're taking a look at statistics where a kilo of cocaine from Colombia is sold at about $48,000 a kilo in the United States uncut, $100,000 in European markets, and for our colleagues in Australasia and the Pacific at about $180,000. What's happening now, though, next slide, is this diversification of both the consumption and the production. So here in the United States, we're actually consuming more synthetic drugs, not plant-based drugs, such as heroin and cocaine. Those are finding other markets. But what's very frightening is the ability, just 10 blocks from the White House, they found in the basement of a multi-million-dollar condominium complex, a laboratory creating methamphetamine. This is 10 blocks under the nose of our government here in Washington. Why is this? There's huge demand, and we know the mental effects of COVID and the isolation created even more pent-up demand, and sadly too, the ability to market these types of drugs through social media has found a new appetite and younger audiences. Next slide. So what we're seeing now, though, as well, is sadly how fentanyl, for those who don't know, it's grains, not grams of fentanyl that can kill you. For those who are not familiar with it, it's an opioid. It's 50 times more potent than heroin. And more importantly, it's extremely lucrative. Here in the United States, we consume it in pill format. And sadly, we talk about the poisoning. And if you take a look at the next slide, how it's being now inserted in counterfeit drugs. What you would think you're getting off the internet, which is a painkiller, is actually laced with fentanyl and has become lethal. We are now faced with an epidemic in the United States, and sadly, it's affecting all types. If we look at the next slide, we're averaging about 107,000 confirmed opioid overdose deaths in the United States. We who follow this topic believe it's underreported. Very few parents are subjecting their children who die of this type of poisoning or overdose to an autopsy that would make the case files probably much more than the 107,000. This month, we're looking at a 343 overdose cases per day in the United States. So this is a very lucrative, but also extremely dangerous drug. And what's happening with our society, and more importantly, how and why is this drug taking hold, particularly among our younger people? Next slide. So you'll see here, so we work a lot with the DEA with a campaign called One Pill Can Kill, taking a look at how young people are using social media, but more importantly, the emojis. They don't even communicate with words anymore. They communicate with emojis to make their requests and also to market the different drugs. And sadly, we know how prolific social media is. There are even now videos on TikTok, the very popular video app, on how to use the antidote called Narcan, which some people say that's great that you know how to use it, but it might be actually encouraging more experimentation with these drugs. What we've seen, though, too, there are two culprits that are pushing this drug onto the streets in the United States. Next slide, please. So the fentanyl itself and precursor chemicals for all drugs actually come from China. Some from India, but mostly from China. They make their way through Mexico, where different laboratories are putting them into pill format, and even more frighteningly, into a format that looks like candies, targeting a younger adolescent community. And then it moves through the border, across the border into the United States. You all know about the humanitarian migrant crisis that we have on the southern border of the United States, which is distracting many of the border security agents, which the cartels take advantage of those vacuous spaces to move the drugs. So a lot of it's coming through Arizona, as most of the agents are focused on migrants who are crossing into Texas. So it's a combined piece. The cartels are making money as well from human trafficking, which is a different panel that we're going to have later on. So how do they move and, more importantly, take advantage of the proceeds? And that's the topic of our panel. Next slide. The Mexican cartels have been very, very creative in the way that they've moved money, with the classic ones, through banks, cash couriers, and then more importantly, through trade-based money laundering that our colleague John Casara is going to explain to us, black market peso. So I'll leave that to you for tomorrow. I don't want to steal your thunder. But most importantly, we're starting to see an increase of the activity of Chinese money brokers, who are using casinos, trade-based money laundering, and a very sophisticated way of using contacts here in the United States to gather the cash. And more importantly, they're Chinese who are in desperate need of cash, US dollars in particular, because of capital controls. The same is the problem in Mexico, where I just spent a week, 2 weeks ago, where in Mexico you can only exchange a maximum of $400 per day per person. So with all this income that they're getting from American drug users, what are they going to do with the cash? And sadly, as Andreas has pointed out, money laundering is an extremely lucrative business. These are facilitators, but sadly, there are victims in this white-collar crime of money laundering. Next slide. The other thing we're taking a look at is now the use and exploitation, or I'd say the abuse, of cyberspace by Mexican cartels and other criminal networks. They got wise during the COVID pandemic. As we remember, everything was shut down. What they did was transfer their markets and expand them into cyberspace. So for example, from my sofa in Georgetown, I can actually order through the dark net, and using cryptocurrency, the synthetic drugs that I would like that will be mailed to my house. It's impossible for the US Postal Service to screen millions of packages each day, and sadly, that's how they compensated for literally closed borders, the paralysis of airlines, as well as global trade, but they saw there was still demand. What's more frightening is they're using and exploiting younger people. So this is a case study in Mexico, in Guadalajara, where the new cartel Nueva Generación Jalisco, which is the rival of Sinaloa, they're trying to figure out what to do with all this cash that they're making in dollars in the United States. They're paying young university-age students to open virtual wallets and then lend their wallets so that they can launder money. So the dollars are loaded into cyberspace in the United States, and they're withdrawn in Mexico into pesos in order to pay for all of the thousands of people who support the entire supply chain and the operation of the criminal enterprise of the Mexican cartels. So the cartels are involved in drug trafficking, human smuggling, and trafficking, which we're getting into in another panel, but it's really quite disturbing. Now enter in another actor, which are the Chinese brokers. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Chinese nationals around the world are looking for hard currency because of the CCP's crackdown on capital flight. So there's an actual demand for US dollars, but more importantly, there's also a surplus of US dollars because of the Mexican cartel's lucrative activities. So as you can see from the thematic here, they also, just as a ethnic profiling, love casinos and gambling. And for that, you need cash. It's also, by the way, an Asian thing. As a descendant of Filipino Americans, gambling is quite a pastime for Asians, and that's where the dollars are used. The other thing that we've seen too is that the Chinese are using hard currency and dollars to buy huge tranches of property and real estate. And this is an area where we're trying to look at, as Ambassador Bolton talked about this morning, the asymmetrical threat and how advanced the adversaries in strategic competition, Russia and China, are, and how in the United States we're probably 10 steps back. So this is an area that we're trying to take a look at. Next slide, please. And this is what we're really taking a look at, is question of asymmetrical warfare. So as I mentioned, I work and teach at the National Defense University, where we do teach the classic tenets of warfare, conventional, unconventional, and now asymmetric. The other course I teach is cybersecurity, where we're really embarking on a new frontier of this question about how is asymmetrical warfare now being waged. But I would posit there's another domain, which is all about the money. And this is an area that I think is under-researched and under-emphasized because of the fact that you combine financial intelligence now with what we call digital intelligence to follow the money trail and then follow the cyber trail to figure out how these illicit networks and rogue nations and adversaries are starting to interact. And this is an area where now we're taking a look at how is China waging an asymmetrical war against the youth of America through the drug trade. It's very provocative, and there's a lot of debates and discussions here on Capitol Hill if fentanyl should be considered a weapon of mass destruction because of the number of people that are dying. Very controversial, but something that we would help to curb the flow and the import and the movement of precursor chemicals and fentanyl. It's something that I call on other parliamentarians to take a look at. How are you controlling the flow of trade from China that includes fentanyl, fentanyl analogs, and more importantly, precursor chemicals? And also, what are we looking at in terms of all this cash that's still not regulated in terms of counter-threat finance and anti-money laundering measures? So these are the types of things that are debates, and you'll also hear there will be several new congressmen in the new Congress that has just been elected here in the United States that are going to raise the prospect of declaring the Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. I'm not for or against, I just want to raise awareness about the current debate here in the legislative arm of our government, and then more importantly, how this crisis of the fentanyl poisoning and epidemic that has come and been aggravated by the COVID-19 situation, as well as the aggressive stance of the Mexican cartels pushing this very easily accessible, easy to consume drug, and warning that this can actually happen in your countries. Next slide and last slide. So as many of us who've come to the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum for years have emphasized the importance of following the money. I think that we have really improved in the last 20 years to make financial intelligence an integral part of all of our investigations against criminal groups and terrorist groups and political corruption. But what we need to start to incorporate is get this mindset about how our strategic competitors, China and Russia, are also using what we call the financial instrument of national power to promote their nefarious agendas and undermine ours. And only through strong legislation and what I call up-to-date legislation, looking at the new evolution of how things are evolving in cyberspace with new technologies, that we must keep abreast of these innovations and then legislate to the new innovations to best prepare ourselves and protect democracy and prosperity in all of our partner countries. Thank you very much.
Great presentation, Celina, as always.